Wednesday, June the 21st, and it is time to track the tropics. I'm WESH 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And I'm Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson from WJCL in Savannah.
All right, so Jeremy, you've been traveling, which is why we are doing this on a Wednesday instead of on our normal Tuesday. But, I'm actually kind of glad, if I'm honest. Not that you're back, because I know you like your vacation stuff. But I'm kind of glad because we've had an opportunity to settle into some tropical stuff and kind of watch things progress out. Things are a little busy out there right now.
Yeah, and they're busy in an area that in June you don't really think would get very busy, that main development region, kind of off the coast of Africa, east of the Caribbean, so in that central part of the Atlantic area there. That looks a lot more like almost peak hurricane season versus the first month.
Yeah, no doubt. So we've got Tropical Storm Bret on the left side of your screen. We've got Tropical Wave Invest 93 in the center of your screen and another tropical wave that's rolling off the shoreline of Africa on the right side of your screen. This is such a uniquity, truthfully. Just a truly unique situation. So let's start with Bret and just kind of get into some of the interesting statistics here. First off, it's the earliest named storm this far east. Now, it's moved off to the west, of course, but the interesting thing is it formed so far to the east. The old record holder, by the way, for storms named that far east was Bret in 2017. Now, it could have been the earliest June hurricane, but Jeremy, we know that did not play out, nor is that the expectation from the National Hurricane Center anymore.
No, they have winds maybe increasing a little bit, but satellite view there that you saw, the IR wasn't quite as impressive, and then this moves off to the west. It's moving pretty quickly right now. When you get these storms over probably 10 to 12 miles per hour with movement, that's a pretty fast mover. So it's moving in a westerly direction right now, across over the Antilles there, and then head its way into the Caribbean, eventually just weakening to a depression.
It's definitely started looking better on the satellite presentation. When we look at the satellite presentation this morning, one thing you'll notice is the spiral banding, the outflow, definitely looking like a strong tropical storm as it approaches the Antilles there. But it's already started. You can already see the convection impacted there. It's already starting to feel just a little bit there of wind shear. And as it continues into the Caribbean Sea, Jeremy, that wind shear is what will eventually do this storm system in.
Yeah, so it's going to sort of just tear it apart. The winds will start to increase even more with elevation, and then that starts to go into, is this like an early sign of maybe some sort of El Nino influence? I know last week we spent a lot of time on, hey, the El Nino has officially formed. It's not as strong right now as it will be as we get into late summer and fall, and maybe have a greater influence. And as we say, that's kind of our wild card, that we don't know exactly how much it will influence things. We could still get a lot of named storms, right, but maybe as they head towards the Caribbean, they won't be quite as strong.
It'll be very interesting to see, right? And you don't just turn things on a dime, too. I mean, like the Pacific Ocean basin is warming up. There's no doubt. If we look at the anomalies, let me load up the sea surface temperature anomalies, okay? There's a definite warming in the Pacific Basin there. So El Nino has begun to kick in. But the problem is that the Atlantic Basin is also anomalously hot. So there you go. So when we talk about the future here of Tropical Storm Bret, it is expected to weaken to a tropical depression status by this weekend, and computer models very much keyed in on that. One thing that's interesting is the intensity models. A couple of days ago, we're trying to show this as a Category 3 hurricane, and then we started to feel that wind shear in the models, and here you go. Basically, one model tries briefly to bring it to hurricane status, borderline, but I think essentially we're where we are. We may get a little bit stronger, but then it's just downhill from there. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, you see all of those intensity models dropping this off and completely weakening it.
Yeah, and I think if it crosses over those islands just as a tropical storm, that's something they've been through so many times. And maybe even if it gets close to hurricane force winds, and as long as it keeps that forward speed, also then maybe limiting a little bit how much flooding there would be.
Yeah, yeah. Now, somebody's asking, and I think that this is an interesting question. Does this mean that we're in for a very bad hurricane season, Jeremy?
Well, I mean, I think that's the number one question that everyone is trying to figure out that does any type of seasonal forecast. But to us, we went into the season March the 1st. We have not changed our forecast at all. We're at 14 to 18 named storms. And one thing we've noticed now, I mean, we noticed it a little bit in May. I would say June, we've started to notice this a lot more. Some of the more named forecasts that people are starting to inch their numbers up. And even I sent you a text that I saw, like the Weather Channel. Yeah. Just to mention that. I mean, everyone knows that's a pretty brand name, but they increased their numbers here recently.
They did. Whereas we put our forecast out March 1st, we're not touching it. We think that, and we have thought that it was going to be kind of this slightly above average hurricane season, which going into an El Nino year is just such a rarity. So we've kind of had this idea in our back pocket for months and months and months. And now that we're watching things play out, I mean, to me, it truly is remarkable to see. Now, Jeremy, I've done tropical weather for 22 years, okay? To see a wave train look like this in June. Now, it's the end of June, okay? Sure, I'll give you that. But to see the tropical wave train look like this is something I've never seen before, period.
Yeah, and I guess that goes a little bit back to, hey, we needed some sort of disturbance out there to kind of test. We've been talking about how warm the water is out there. So now also we're getting a test. Okay, this is moving into an area that if there is this strengthening El Nino, right, maybe it will kind of undercut a little bit of that strength, and that's headed almost due west. Was it towards almost like getting a little bit closer to Central America now? Yeah,
that's the current thinking. A couple of people are asking about the Saharan air layer, and so this is kind of an interesting look. So this is the satellite imagery with the Saharan dust layer added to it. Oh, clicked the wrong graphic, my bad. But you can see there is some Saharan air, some Saharan dust, but it's not a ton. You know, Jeremy, usually it's a little further south this early summer, and it's usually already propagating thick into the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, and the southeastern United States.
Yeah, and last year I remember we talked about it so often that Saharan dust was making its way to the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico. We even had some of that moving to Florida and the southeast last year. I think it was by this time. So that was another key factor last year. We were going below pretty much every single forecast that was put out last year. We had around 13 to 16 named storms, and a lot of the other ones were still on the La Nina. Hey, it's going to be a super active season. Our numbers were less, and we had a couple different bouts with the dust last year.
Yeah. So at this point, we're not really seeing the dust playing in. So we've gone over Tropical Storm Bret. The good news, as we had mentioned, is that the forecast cone from the Hurricane Center keeps that away from the United States and the Caribbean islands. You know, quick pass through the Antilles, and then it's basically fading out, and then Central America gets a turn on that. But that's not the only storm system that we're watching. Behind Bret, Jeremy, we've got Invest 93. Now, I changed some of the color table on this just to try and really brighten that up a little bit. Here's a closer inspection on it. The convection is continuing to build on this, and it does start, at least to my eye, it's starting to look like it's developing a bit of a spin, starting to get a little more organized.
Yeah, it's trying to, and we think this one takes a little more of a west-northwest track versus Bret, which is pretty much on that due westerly movement. So there's the spaghetti models, plotting all kinds of different computer models on this. And something we were talking about is the direction it's going. You remember with our long-range forecast, we're not really focused on sort of these systems that come off from Africa. It's down the road once they get maybe closer to like Puerto Rico, into the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, a little bit closer to the Bahamas, at least for our method. So lo and behold, we've been talking about first week of July off the East Coast. Well, if this develops into Cindy, we've looked at a couple longer range models, and that's going to sort of plop it off the East Coast.
And then that makes you want, does that put that into the time frame of in our long range forecast, that kind of July 2nd through the 10th timeline? What do you think?
I think it does, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of it's not a household name, but if you look on some websites, you can find the CFS model, and that goes out 700 plus hours. Well, obviously, we know lots of air when you start going out far, but some of these models are latching onto this. And while at the moment none of them are bringing it to coastal areas of the United States, but it is in that area of the far western Atlantic off the East Coast.
Right.
And that's really that sort of Carolina, as we say, time frame, because there's multiple lows that we had pinpointed during that, about a week to 9 day span or so.
Yeah, this is all of the lows that we were tracking, Jeremy. And this is not a graphic that's like designed for us to really look at the details, other than as to say each one of these lows was a position of a low off the East Coast. And many of them were in that kind of 1 week time span, which is why we've got that focus for the Carolinas in that July 2nd through the 10th window. So that is the forecast we put out in early March. So there you go, right?
Yeah, yeah. We kind of. I'm older, so when I was growing up, there was an infomercial with Ron Popeil, and his catchphrase was "Set it and forget it."
Yeah.
So come March 1st, we kind of issue our forecast, and obviously, if we ended up in the season and we were like, you know what, this is going sideways, but we've been doing this a number of years now. And we're confident at the forecast we put out, and right or wrong, we go with it. And I would say so far, this is off to a pretty busy start when we're going to get to July and already we're on 3 storms so far. Obviously, we had the unnamed one in early January.
Right.
But when we put our forecast out, we didn't know that was going to be a thing. So
no, it wasn't a thing. And
we didn't have a lot of the forecasts that came out later on down the road already knew, okay, we have 1 storm counted in the season.
Well, and remember March, we were still very much in that winter spring timeline. And the only thing that was really on the scope was knowing El Nino was going to be picking up. And so we kind of went out on a limb saying, even though there's El Nino, guys, what we're seeing using our methodology would indicate an above average season.
Yeah, so 14 to 18 named storms, as you showed earlier. So the average is 14, which the 30-year averages bumped up from 12 just a couple of years ago. So, yeah, we're looking at that's what we think again. We'll see how it plays out. There's 5+ months of the season left.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're just getting started. So I put this up just for informational purposes. That tropical wave that's been dubbed or tagged Invest 93 has a high likelihood from the National Hurricane Center over the next 2 days' time, a 70% likelihood of developing. Hurricane Center says conditions are favorable and a tropical depression could form in the next few days. And the global computer models, which we'll look at in a little bit, Jeremy, the global computer models are definitely indicating that. Here's a look at the tropical models for Invest 93. And there again, you can see that gradual strengthening, particularly Friday into Saturday, Sunday. So right about the time that Bret drops off the maps, that's when we're thinking Cindy more than likely will be named. And as we had shown there, the computer models doing that kind of west-northwest jog with this thing.
I don't know. Yeah, and so that heads off to the west-northwest, and then notice once you get to like 5+ days out or 7, however many of these go, it kind of diverges. You have some that are north of Puerto Rico, others that are like curving it out to sea. I think it's probably kind of split the difference there, or I don't think it's that far right one, and probably not as far down as those northern islands.
Yeah, agreed. So let's do this then. Let's dial up the global models and kind of take a peek and see what's doing. And I'm going to keep in the corner the information on Bret. So just for perspective purposes, if you're new to tracking global models in a kind of a raw form, this is the GFS 6Z, the most recent run of the GFS. On the very bottom of your screen, you know what? Let me just lose that. On second thought, that just to clean it up a little bit. All right, so bottom left corner of your screen or kind of bottom center, that's Bret. first wave to move toward the Antilles right there. So that's going to be late Thursday into early Friday. Notice through the islands, and then there's a second storm out in the open Atlantic. I'll bring this in a little closer just to give us a better look at it. So there you go. On the bottom right side of your screen, that's Bret. Notice the purple's starting to disappear by Saturday and continuing to disappear by Sunday as Bret weakens. And then on the right side of your screen, that's what will become, we think, Cindy, kind of lifting up to the north. Now, the GFS, at least, Jeremy, has it very near Bermuda by the end of next week. So that's kind of interesting.
Okay. Yeah, and again, end of next week, here we are today, the 21st. So we're looking at last couple days of June. And then other models have it maybe just a day or so slower, so into that early July timeframe. So, yeah, we'll see where it goes. But if it does head over that area, that would get out of the sort of that wake of Bret water. It would be moving over. It's pretty warm.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And then after that, just continuing on, and you know, there's some storm systems around Florida, but at least nothing for Florida or South Carolina that, you know, South Carolina and Georgia that we really have to worry about. And then widening it out beyond that, interestingly enough, look at the coast of Africa right there around the 5th of July, 6th of July, another thing kind of rolling off of Africa. So the GFS model is saying that wave train is going to continue, though interesting to note that it is not picking up, at least for now, it is not picking up at all on the idea of this third wave doing anything. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, the European model did not seem like it was very interested in that system leaving the coast of Africa.
Yeah.
And I also I haven't looked here in the last second or two. Let me pop in here, but it doesn't look like the Hurricane Center's even highlighted it.
Not yet, at least. Not yet, at least.
So that is an area of less interest right now, we'll call it.
Well, we'll watch it. Certainly, we'll watch it. All right, so what about the ensembles? Let's start with the GFS ensembles and just look and see. And I looked at this on my Facebook Live this morning. The GFS ensembles are not really trying to initialize much in the way of tropical activity at all, which, you know, is so like the GFS to just kind of do it, run to the beat of its own drum. Whereas you've got decent ensemble support. If you look around the Antilles there on the bottom right side of your, actually it's a little out of the view, so let me go back here. If you look at the Antilles there, you see a bunch of those little L's. That's 50 different versions of the GFS trying to show something, and then back behind it, a bunch of the ensembles trying to show Cindy. But interesting to note is that on the European, you start losing ensemble support lifting north of the Antilles toward the Turks and Caicos. So according to the European, at least, the thought is that it starts to fade as it moves further and further out.
Right. And that's with Cindy, correct?
Cindy, correct, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the models don't have it. We mentioned that some move it more off, like, and when I say off the East Coast, I'm talking not like just a handful of miles. It was pretty far off the East Coast.
Yeah.
But it did give the appearance that it wasn't very strong on some of those models. So just kind of the reflection of it, or a little low. We'll watch it. That one, though, pretty good confidence it's going to make that turn to the northwest. Right.
So at this point, then, the good news is that we're not looking at any kind of trouble here in the southeastern United States. But we've seen on all of the models, Jeremy, that the long and short of things is that we are into a nice busy phase, and it makes total sense when we look at the sea surface temperature anomalies. You know, you're talking about water temperatures that are running several degrees above average, which is why we're already getting development in the main development region.
Yeah, in the blues, closer to Florida, northeast, Gulf of Mexico, and off the southeast coast, I think we'll finally start to see that water warm up or maybe get closer to average, because we have just been stuck in probably good last couple weeks here with that upper low hanging over us. We've had so much rain, so many clouds. Our temperatures in Savannah have been running, I mean, as you look at May all the way through June, quite a bit below average.
Right.
And, I mean, we get a couple more days of these thunderstorms, and then we might finally start to warm up. So then along with that, we'd probably see the Gulf and that area near the southeast coast, the waters start to warm up a bit.
Yeah, and all of this, what's kind of funny is that all of this is a part of spring. In reality, we have not yet gotten to summer. The summer solstice starts in just several minutes' time.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's coming up here in less than an hour, the official start of summer. And we've already been, I mean, summer hasn't even started. We've been talking about over the last several days how busy the tropics are. Right. So hopefully that's not something that's going to continue through September, October, into November. It's going to be an awfully long season if it does.
Well, and that's where, there is at least one interesting thing. And I brought this graphic up. So, and I keep referencing back to this. So Phil Klotzbach, Jeremy, had mentioned how rare tropical development is in the main development region. You look, these are where tropical systems form during the month. Okay, so cool, we've got that. We understand that. Now, that said, when you look at where Bret formed, it's kind of in a league of its own. There's only been 4 other systems that have really formed in the central Atlantic there. And Phil Klotzbach, along with several other of the academia world, went on to say essentially that June main development region activity typically linked to very active hurricane seasons. And it's an interesting statistic because your data set is pretty low, right? But this may be an interesting point to make in that, yes, we're already seeing development in the MDR. Thus, history would tell us, and I posted the years, and of course I'd have to go back and dig, but it was like each year had just above average activity. Whether or not there's landfalls is a different story, but above average activity. So kind of an interesting little data set there.
Yeah, let me see. I'll try to dig back through some of his tweets here. But yeah, as he was mentioning that those seasons were pretty active when we had something to develop out that far east during the month of June. I believe it was like, as you mentioned, like 6 to 7 years were above average. Remember last week we were talking about some El Nino stats that were all below average seasons.
Yeah.
So it was like, all right, we now have kind of 2 different things here. So here it was, I found this. So Tropical Depression 3, which is now Bret. Yep. So he tweeted this on June the 19th. Forecasts to strengthen the Eastern Caribbean. 7 years since 1900 have had Eastern Caribbean hurricanes in June through July. Obviously, we don't think this one will quite reach hurricane strength.
Right.
He lists the years. All were above normal seasons, 6 of the 7 being hyperactive.
Yeah, right. And and certainly we hope that that's not the case. So we know that this doesn't, isn't expected to become a hurricane, but we could have something else of a record set, which would be 2 systems forming in the MDR during the month of June. That has never happened going back through records in 1851.
We're pretty confident that that is something that will happen.
Right. So you've got this interesting thing where, for years and years and years, Jeremy, it's like, oh, we're going into an El Nino, so below average season. Well, listen, water temperatures are bathwater out there this year. Even though we're heading into an El Nino season, you have a wave train rolling off of Africa in mid-June and heading into July and August when the temperatures will continue to warm out there. We go in phase on the Madden-Julian oscillation in July. Boom.
Right. And also, I mean, our time frame for more, maybe something closer into the U.S. is definitely during July.
Right.
And then August, this part of the pattern would return. So maybe there's more activity out there.
Yep. And
then late August into September is another window we have identified where some of our hot spots would probably really have to be watched.
Yeah. That's very, you've definitely gotten me on this kind of cycling idea, and we've worked so hard together on this, but I didn't even think about like taking this weather snapshot and fast forwarding it 50 days. Like, it may not be that it's landfall hotspots, but it could be a super active part of the pattern, and it just all kind of wants to recurve and fade maybe as it works off toward the east there.
Yeah, in what we do for research, obviously we put out an entire number for hurricane season, But also, we've talked about how if there's in the Atlantic basin, if you take the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean, and the Atlantic, what would be most active? And we
Right.
have always for our forecast this year been on the Atlantic is really where the bulk of the activity will be this year.
Yeah, no doubt. There was absolutely a ton of activity in that off the eastern seaboard corridor. So for those of you that are not familiar with our long range forecast, let's just discuss a little bit about that so that everybody's familiar. There's several techniques that we use, but one that has proven to be an interesting cutting edge technique in the meteorological world is the Lezak recurring cycle. Jeremy, you want to chat about that a bit?
Yeah, so I learned about it first in 2009. I worked with Gary down in Kansas City, so I learned it and then I studied it myself because I think whatever forecast method you use, you need to tailor it to work for yourself. I used it a lot initially for more like snow forecasting, cold air outbreaks, transitioned into tropical forecasting with it. And of the two, I think it's a lot easier to use it for tropical forecasting because with the method we use, basically we're studying the weather patterns in the fall, and then we're able to interpret that or predict and fast forward into the spring and summer months.
Right.
So some people don't like the method, don't use the method. You know what? That's their choice. There's some methods on regular NCEP site or other forecast things. We talked about this. I'm not a huge one to every single day dive into the ensembles.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I think is very important. and we've talked so much about this, right? Like meteorology as a whole is just like practicing medicine. It's a very subjective field. And you just kind of, all you want to do is develop your tool chest, right? And you want to be able to add different tools to it and use. And I'm so grateful that you've shared it with me just to get an idea of things pushing forward. And I think that at the very least, this is something of a tool to add to the tool chest. Is it the end all be all? No, nothing is, right? But we've had some great success with this and using that recycling weather theory, we've come up with our hotspots. And this is our hotspot map, Jeremy, for this year for the hurricane season.
Yep. All right, yeah, leave that full, and you can talk about that for a second.
Yeah, so basically the idea is when we look in the recurring weather cycle, what we're looking for is these areas of low pressure, these storm systems that are like developing and where they're moving, and we cycle down to what we think are the big players in a particular year. And for example, these are kind of the big players. They're the dates when they happen, and so when do they recycle? How often does this weather pattern cycle over and over and over? And we've come up with about a 50-day recycle. And so because of that, the first piece of the next cycle is going to be, as Jeremy had mentioned, perhaps that Cindy storm, Invest 93, cycles back around July 2nd through the 10th. Now, we put potential return dates and we left May 12th through the 20th. There was not a tropical system that was up there, Jeremy, but there was a storm system that was in that exact spot in that exact timeline.
Yeah, we had a couple areas of low pressure move through there. Yeah, in this window of all of our forecast windows is actually the biggest one because there were multiple areas of low pressure that were either near or off from the East Coast during this part. And again, when we term it something like Carolina, that's just us sort of translating it down to an area that people can relate to.
Right.
If we were like, oh, here's the lat lawn that we're really focused
right.
on, that wouldn't really mean much to people. So, the Carolina part of the pattern, that's just there were some areas of low pressure nearby, and we think the potential once you translate or fast forward into hurricane season with warmer water, well, maybe something tropical could develop there.
Right. You have to remember, we are social scientists as much as we're anything else, right? So that's the Carolina part of the pattern. And then afterward, for us here in my area, then we have to start watching the West Coast Florida part of the pattern, which comes back in July 11th through the 16th. And then the East Coast of Florida pattern, which originated with Hurricane Nicole, this one, July 19th through the 25th. I was just talking to my boss yesterday, Jeremy, about how her beach weekend fits into these Florida times. And it's like, boss, I told you on March the 1st. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think both of us have this where we have people, whether they're people we work with or just people we know that have seen some of the success we've had with tropical forecasting, sort of pinpointing some of these dates, and they ask us, "Hey, I'm traveling this day or that day. How's that looking when you look out?" And then you're kind of like, I don't know about that. Maybe just wait another week.
For me, it's kind of funny that one of those July time frames where Florida's kind of in a realm. I've got a work conference up in Boston and a wedding in Maine. And so it's like, just please work out for me.
Right. So, all right. So it looks like you pulled up or have ready the ACE here,
Yeah.
which is accumulated cyclone energy, which 3.6 is right now. That includes a little bit of Bret as that adds up. And then this number will continue to go up off Cindy forms. And this is just kind of how strong, how long these tropical systems last. And the 30-year average is a 1.9. Last year, I mean, through early part of July, we were way below average.
Yeah, and we stayed that way right through like August. It was just like a dead part of the season. This year is coming more in like a lion than a lamb. So we are well above the 30-year average and well above last year. And as we get more and more into larger, stronger storms, we'll certainly be adding to this. So good times. I want to open this up to questions that folks may have, because Jeremy, you and I have been kind of yentering it on for a while.
Right.
I just want to make sure that anybody that has a question can get that taken care of. A lot of people are talking about the wave train and about, have we seen anything like this before? And I've done tropical weather for 22 years. I've never seen a wave train look like this in June. Jeremy, can you remember anything like this?
No, and I think some of those stats you showed earlier with farthest east development or right around that with Bret of 2017.
Yeah.
And then if we get another one in this area of the Atlantic, which we think will happen in maybe the next couple days, then that would be I believe you said the first time ever.
Yeah. So
in
Ryan's
June, at least in June.
Correct.
For this to form.
Yeah. Once we get into July, things are different. Okay. So Ryan's asking, I'm heading to Jamaica on Friday, west side of the island for a week. Is it safe to go, or maybe just a day of rain from Bret?
What was the date range again?
So Friday for a week. So just looking at the storm system itself. I don't think that there's a big issue. I mean, you'll get a little bit of rain south of the island. It doesn't look like, it's going to be striking Jamaica directly. That's the forecast. A depression in the vicinity on Saturday night and Sunday morning. So you may get some clouds, some showers. But if it's unraveling and staying well enough south of you, you may also get nothing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you just don't want to be sailing into what that ship did Memorial Day weekend that was off the southeast coast. So
Yeah. And I've had a lot of people...
a depression, you probably get just unsettled clusters of thunderstorms developing that might resemble a depression at about any time. They just don't really have any circulation with them.
Yeah, we had 46 mile per hour winds yesterday, 64 mile per hour winds the day before, just in Orlando in a normal stormy pattern. So,
right.
Joy's asking, what has changed in Africa to set this off so early? Jeremy.
Overall, I would say the overall weather pattern, that part, we have the easterly winds, so these clusters of thunderstorms. I wouldn't expect it to stay this way the entire season, so we'll probably see this activity.
Yeah.
And then once we get into July, it might just start to focus more on some of these closer systems that we'll be watching for our coastline here in the United States. A little better chance of maybe something popping up closer to home. Remember, Arlene, that was nothing that moved across the Atlantic. That was just something that developed in the Gulf.
Right.
And so I think that's what we would start to watch more as we go into July. But I would say maybe lack of dust. So these thunderstorm clusters moving off Africa are able to survive, where there might be thunderstorms or a lack of them in other years, and then they get caught in the dust and just fade away quickly.
100%. Yeah, more active monsoon. And I think for at least the development, not talking Africa for a minute, the development over the ocean is just water temperatures are grossly warmer than average. So you combine the two, and that's why weather is so complex. That's why that's why sometimes you'll get an academic type meteorologist who's like, no, that's impossible because of this. And it's like,
Right.
we don't know what we don't know meteorologically. There are a million variables playing in, and we're just trying to grasp at straws, figuring those variables out, right? I mean,
Yeah. And I think when these things do happen, you just have to note them, kind of look into it a little bit and learn from them.
yeah. All right, Carl says, okay, super nerd thought. Do you think it's possible to estimate the annual ACE points by multiplying the ACE points during the observation period by the number of times the LRC repeats? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's something that we could look into.
The only problem is as you get into different versions, different cycles, there are other players, the MJO, the Mad Julian oscillation, the NAO, then water temperatures, and then you're transitioning into more of an El Nino.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that you could kind of play around with and then maybe have variables that would then reduce the sort of that ACE score in your hypothetical looking forward, like, okay, El Nino's forming. But then last year, I feel like, I don't know if it would have been off or not, because then you might have like had in a multiplier, it's a La Nina, so we need to jump it up higher.
I like our methodology, but I have zero issue of testing stuff out behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah.
But our methodology, I mean, listen, we have a new production manager at WESH, and she's worked at WESH, years and years ago, but people were hyping the idea of us doing a hurricane forecast. And one of the things that was brought to her attention was the long-range hurricane forecast. And as I move this over here, and the one thing that my colleague said is they're like, those guys called 100% of the... Why is Arlene showing up? I don't know why that's there. Those guys called... Hold on, let me fix this. I'm on a thought and then the graphic hoses me. Those guys called 100% of the storms that formed last year. Of course, it's not going to work. Anyway, and I was like, well, don't expect that every year, because that's an impossibility. Right. But we did pretty okay last year. We did pretty okay the year before, pretty okay the year before. We've done pretty okay.
Yeah. So we've talked about last year, the year before that, the year before that, our numbers were on. And really, I think once we move forward now, it's getting into the busier part of hurricane season once we get through July and then August, September. So then it's more getting into those laser focused sort of time frames to really watch, because the closer you get to peak season, those are the storms that, if they would develop, get close to the coast or to our hot spots, that then you get potential problems.
So let's look at those next hotspot dates before we wrap this thing up, Jeremy. All right, because it is 10:38 after all. Yep. You and I are both Chiefs tonight. Tony Manalfi's out of town, out of the country, which means you're stuck with me and Wesh. Anyway, you're always stuck with Jeremy, but that's a pleasure. All right, so Carolina, quote unquote, coast storm, mid-Atlantic / Carolinas, whatever you want to call it. July 2nd through the 10th. That's coming up before we know it, Jeremy.
Yeah, that's 4th of July weekend, so don't cancel your plans, because we've talked about this favors a systems that would potentially be off the East Coast, or one that might even get close to the Carolinas. So last time through, remember in May, I saved the map. I have it. We can bring it out sometime. There was a low pressure area. It went right over the Carolinas. Yep. So, and that was not tropical in nature. So you can still get lows that form. And the last time we were here, we were talking about low pressure off the northeast coast, and there was an area of low pressure. I saved that map also. Wasn't tropical in nature this time. So what we're looking for are just these features that come back, and then again, you get closer to peak hurricane season, that would tend to favor them being tropical in nature.
Yeah. So at the very least, you're going to get clouds and an uptick of rainfall, right? So, all right. Florida West Coast storm system. Watch this one cycle through a few different times. This was the part of the pattern that gave that odd Carolina non-tropical low that Carnival ship went into. That's July 11th through the 16th. This is when my boss is at her beach trip, so sorry about that, boss.
So one thing I want to say is this one does kind of cross over Florida, so that's why we have to watch maybe near the southeast coast again. But again, it really favors the hotspots we've already talked about.
Yep. And then after this, last but not least, the part of the pattern that was originated with Hurricane Nicole, the east coast of Florida, that goes all the way down to the Keys, July 19th through the 25th. We've seen this one even in the driest of months. So we'll have to watch how this plays out. This is definitely a more active part of the pattern as well.
Yeah, and I think July will give us a good test run just to kind of see what this may look like. And then September, I'd say that has to be watched extremely close.
These all will. Hopefully we can figure out a way to get the tropics to quiet down just a little bit. Please.
Right, and maybe this will be sort of last year only in reverse, where busy front half of the season, and then we get towards the end and it kind of shuts down.
Yeah, indeed. All right, it's 10:40. That's it. You have anything else to add, Jeremy?
No, I don't. And I think next week we're both around on, I believe, on Tuesday. The week after that is the 4th of July on Tuesday. We'll give everyone advance notice on what we decide there.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, listen, thank you all for hanging out for Tracking the Tropics on a Wednesday morning. I'm WESH 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And I'm WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson in Savannah.
We will see you all next week, Tuesday morning at 10 a.m.